Thank you. I have a different sort of story. I don't have a PhD and I've never been overseas to do any higher degrees or research, but I do have a story anyway that I think might interest you. And this is basically a presentation on how to build a research career with virtually no funding. So I've always been a clinician and, you know, I'm a dermatologist. So I'm working in a field that I think a lot of people might see as a bit trivial, but it is 20% of what general practitioners do, and it's about 10% of what paediatricians do. And unfortunately, it's taught very, very badly at undergraduate level. I'm sure you'll agree to that. So it's a mystery to most people, but despite it being a mystery to most doctors, there's an awful lot of lay experts out there who everyone is their own dermatologist and everybody has their own opinion, and that can be quite challenging as a clinician. It's very difficult to get funding for dermatological research because the stuff we do is not seen as life-threatening, it's not cancer, it's not glamorous. But exciting things are happening and we do need talented people. At the moment we only have 3 academics who are on the payroll at the University of Sydney in dermatology. I'm one of them. But I got interested in research very early. I wrote my first paper as a medical student, and one of the basic tenets of my existence is never accept anything that doesn't make sense and never believe anybody else's diagnosis just because it exists. There might be another explanation for things. So I'd always worked as a clinician. I had a VMO appointment. I started in Penrith with a VMO position at Nepean Hospital, then Windsor Hospital. Then I was also working at the Camperdown Children's Hospital. I came to Westmead when that opened up and eventually came here in 2005. So I was offered a lecturer position at Sydney Uni. In 2007, I had a background of a lot of teaching and assessment and writing papers, which all I did in my spare time, usually at 1 o'clock in the morning. And when I started on my first day, I didn't have an office, I didn't have a computer. I did have the help of a research registrar, and I didn't have a high degree. About 10 years later, my institution, my department, has a thriving dermatology research department. We have high degree students, MD students, and we've had a lot of publications. And more importantly, everybody we've had as one of our fellows has become a dermatologist or gotten into dermatology training. So the only funding I had for all of this was my own salary from the university for a 0.5 position and the salary of the registrar. So how did I get from there to here? Now, I'm best known for vulval disease. And it all started when I was a clinician in Penrith many years ago. I was a kind of a idealistic young dermatologist, and I looked at a map of Sydney. Where was there a hole without a dermatologist? And that was Penrith. So off I went and I hung out my shingle with another dermatologist from my year, and we were so naive, it was ridiculous. And I don't know how we survived. Every single day I was seeing things, I didn't know what they were. I took on a job as a VMO at Nepean Hospital. What started to come my way were people with vulval disease. So I was the only female specialist of any sort in this great big catchment zone of 1 million people at the time. And I started just seeing people with vulval problems. Now, the only training I'd had as a dermatology registrar about how to manage vulval disease was give them diprazone and they will be happy. And diprazone being a potent topical steroid. And there was just no information. It was what we call an evidence-free zone. There was nothing at all. And it didn't take me very long before I started to think, I've got to work this out. I've got to get some answers for these people. So at first I'd be sitting at my desk and somebody else would come in with an itchy vulva, and I'd just go, oh, if only I could, I wish I had an eject button under my desk and I could just press it and the patient would fall in, and then I could go and get my next patient. And that's how I felt for quite some time. And but you know, I seemed to be helping them with my diprazone and so forth. And then one day I got a call from the local professor of obstetrics and gynecology, Brian Sparrett, who was at Nepean Hospital, and he said to me, I was 6 months pregnant with my first child, and he said, I hear you're curing everyone. Well, you better come and do some research with me. And I said, oh, okay, right. So thinking to myself, no. Anyway, so I went to his rooms and we sat down and we agreed that for the next year, everybody who came to see us with a vulval problem would get a biopsy, and then we would put all our data together and we would see what we had. In those days, there were no ethics committees. This was just agreed between the two of us in his leather-bound chair in his book-lined office, and off we went. So this was my first high-impact paper, and this was published back in 1995. And it took us 3 years to get this published in the British Journal of O&G, which was where you published things in those days if you wanted to make an impact. And back in the day then, it was believed that all vulval problems was due to HPV. It was all wart virus, couldn't be anything else, and therefore you had to laser everybody, and of course everyone was told this, which was terribly stigmatised because it was an STI, and there were some very damaged women out there as a result of this belief. And we were able to show that, in fact, none of it was HPV, and that virtually all of it was some sort of dermatological problem, whether they were referred to a gynecologist or a dermatologist. And it seems self-evident now, but boy, it was news in those days. So overnight I became notorious, and not always in a good way, because the gynecologists weren't very happy with me in some ways. Anyway, I then attracted a lot more vulval disease patients, and so I was collecting more and more data. And I got involved with the University of Sydney by becoming a VMO at this hospital and running paediatric and vulval disease clinics, but at the same time I had a full-time private practice. When I was offered the senior lecturer job, I was second choice to somebody else who didn't want it. It was a 0.5 appointment. But I just thought, well, okay, I'll halve my clinical load, and it'd be nice to get paid for all this research I've been doing for all these years. So, as with other people who've spoken to you, I had enthusiastic mentors, my own department head, Alan Cooper, and the then head of the Northern Clinical School, Professor Michael Field, and also people at my own college. So in my first year, it wasn't like I was setting up a lab. I had to find a room, and I had to get a key for that room, and a computer and a lock on the door and some Wi-Fi. And that was how I started. And so one of the first things I did was, because there was so little dermatology education, I wrote an online course for medical students, because we had virtually no teaching time with them, and that it's still in existence today and is being used by 7 universities around Australia. And I started just writing case reports and modest things with the research registrar. And now we have 2 offices and we have lab space, so that's happened over 10 years. And various offices we've been in. But one of the reasons I was able to do research was that I actually had interests, and I didn't kind of get interested in them. They came to me. I kind of fell into it. So the vulval disease just happened to me, and the paediatric disease happened to me. And also, as a dermatologist working in the field where everyone is their own dermatologist, corticosteroid phobia happened to me. And I don't know whether any of you have experienced it, but it's a thing, and it's a big thing. And when you are a dermatologist, one of your main bugbears really is naturopathy and complementary medicine and all the people who have agendas to stop doctors using medication. So these were my interests, the 2 clinical areas, the corticosteroid phobia, and also how do we educate medical students when we don't actually get any time with them. So I then eventually had rooms in the private hospital over there, and the private hospital is the teaching hospital of Sydney University, and I also had clinics in the public hospital. So I registered my rooms as a research site, and I eventually managed to restrict my practice, so my clinician work was restricted to the things that I wanted to do research in. So every patient who comes to my rooms is consented for research and photography. And if they say no, we flag that, we don't use them in our research. I run a searchable computer program, and as each patient comes in every day, I code them according to what they have. So that if I want to pull out a cohort of, say, 100 people with a certain thing and look at an aspect of their epidemiology or how they're being managed, I can do that in a matter of minutes. And I try to make sure that everyone has a photograph, and I ask everybody standard questions. So as I say, funding's been difficult. There are no $1 million grants going for dermatology, and I don't know of anyone who's a dermatologist in Australia who manages to get that sort of money from NH and MRC and so forth. Our main source of income is drug trials, the university itself. We had a competitive grant to do some online education a couple of years ago. I write a column for Medicine Today, and sometimes we get some money from industry and from multidisciplinary collaborations. So what can you do that will further your career, that will cost nothing? And this might be quite interesting to some of you who are just starting out before you've even gotten into a lab. You can do an observational study. So you can take a cohort of patients and you can follow them over a certain length of time and determine what is going to happen to them, what the variables are. You can do case reviews, you can do case studies, you can do epidemiological studies where you're looking at slightly bigger populations and determining things about them and comparing them to other populations. Or you can do review articles and meta-analysis, and these things teach you a lot about statistics and statistical methods. And it's a good way just to kind of find out whether you like this type of rigour of work, because it's not easy. It's hard work, and I think I can reflect what all the other, particularly female academics have said before me, that how much effort and how much hard work goes into all of this, particularly when you want to have children along the way. No, there isn't a good time. And yes, you have to try and form everything else around them. And while I was doing all of this, I also had 3 kids. And you just have to do your best, but there's a lot of all-nighters, there's a lot of staying up late. So eventually, since I didn't have a PhD, I wrote a thesis and I got a higher degree, which is something called a Doctor of Medicine. And I was able to get that by just putting together all the work that I'd been doing ever since I was a medical student on vulval disease and putting it into a thesis, writing the story of my life, and they gave me a degree, voila. And that was great. And I have the dubious honour of being probably the only person ever who turned up to their graduation ceremony in the wrong gown, because they put me in a PhD gown, and apparently an MD is even higher than that. So that opportunity was lost to me. But eventually I got a promotion to associate professor, and off I went. So once you are in that sort of position, how do you build your reputation? So through your students, your high degree students, by publishing your research, by being successful in getting your people into dermatology training. And I don't know that everybody who comes to work with us wants to do research, but they definitely want to be dermatologists. By service to the university and the college and to the community by teaching, by being visible, publications and presentations goes without saying. And if you are a clinician, also by word of mouth amongst the patients, that through your research, you're doing things that nobody else is doing. And that's very much, I think, how I got to where I am. Teaching and mentoring, eventually, even if you're kind of a small researcher like myself, your reputation grows and high degree students do start to come to you, and you can then make them part of your succession plan. If you want to engage with the wider community, you have to go to the general practitioners and the public and publish in journals that they read and go to their conferences and speak to them, be on editorial boards. We have an institution called Skin Hospital that does a lot of work with the public and with industry, and of course social media. So again, because there's so little information for people with vulval disease out there, and that women struggle with all sorts of misinformation on the internet, and these aren't you know, happy patients. These are people who are desperate and unhappy. So we built a website. We had a grant of $2,000 to do this. So we got these two IT students to do this, and they came up with the name Care Down There. And that's been a very good website, and every so often we just update it a bit. Of course, I'm associated with Sydney Uni. I'm on Facebook, publications, as many as you can manage in peer-reviewed journals and impact journals. I wrote a book, and the book's called The Vulva, oddly enough, a practical handbook for clinicians. And this started in a small way. It's now onto its second edition, and it is published through Cambridge University Press. It's sold all over the world and been translated into Portuguese. Apparently it's very popular in South America. I also made a big contribution to therapeutic guidelines. And Therapeutic Guidelines Dermatology was written by a team of people. I was on that team, and this was many years ago. I think it was in '99 we published it for the first time. And there were many all-nighters to get this going. Anyway, I wrote the original chapter on genital disease. And when the next team came in, they changed everything I'd written, or a lot of it. And when I rang them up to object, they said, well, you've got no evidence. And that was one of the things that really got me going on the subject of lichen sclerosis. And eventually, I think the evidence we generated on how to manage that rare and disabling disease hopefully will change how things are done all over the world. I also got involved in curriculum development because I want to try and influence the way medical students are educated, and to standardise it all over Australia. It's very, very hard to do, but I do feel that dermatologists do need to have a lot of input into what medical students are taught about dermatology, and surprisingly, they're not. So the app we've just written is called Rash Decisions. And Rash Decisions will be on the App Store very soon if you want to learn some dermatology. And that was a PhD project that took us 3 years. So other things you can do if you want to spread your name, be on committees. For instance, the university, the college, various boards. These are some of the things I've done. There I am. That was me being the chief examiner. That was me being the Dean of Education. And in my own research, my small research department, I'm trying to integrate all of my researchers so that senior researchers oversee junior researchers and everyone can draw on what each other is doing. And if you've got a fairly small area of interest, you can do that. Our department works according to this diagram. So we have the head of the school, the input of the university, the input of myself, and then the input of the hospital head, because that's the clinical work that's being integrated, and the PhD students looking after the MPhil students. And so it all goes round and round. How do you build a happy department? That was a question that was asked earlier. I think it's just so important to have a happy department, to have everyone on the same page, liking each other, not allowing bullying and toxic behaviour. It's a big ask, and it's sometimes a bit difficult, but team building, communication, regular meetings and showcases, going out to dinner, going out for drinks, just little things, but they make a really big difference. And, you know, if you're in a research lab and that's not happening, influence it. Now, here's the question. Can you create a career researcher? I'm not so sure you can. I think you can create a temporary researcher, but the sort of people who've spoken to you today, I have a feeling they're very odd people and not your average person. And if you are one of those people, come to us because we need lots more of you. And I guess that if finance is the main driver, it's not for you because it's not going to make you a whole heap of money unless you're lucky enough to come across something that's patentable. I personally hope I'm going to get rich from the app, but you never know. So what about the downside of being a researcher? Well, grant writing, we all struggle with that. Reviewers who don't understand your work. getting back those humiliating and ignorant reviews of all the paperwork you have to do, the endless ethics coming back, going round and round. And the other thing, I don't know if this is true in other disciplines, but certainly in dermatology, as an Australian researcher, I think your work is quite slow to make an impact on the wider medical community. And I think if you look back on the guys who discovered that gastric ulcers were an infection, 25 years later they got the Nobel Prize. Well, they struggled for 10 years, and I don't know that that's totally changed. The upside, an academic job as a clinician researcher, it's just so interesting. It's got so many facets, and as an older person like myself, it is a real joy to be around young people, to learn from them, to mentor them, and just to be in their presence. And you know, you learn all this stuff about how to text and the latest stuff is that you should be saying. And so many of my research registrars have become my friends. I'm always learning from them. I'm always discovering new things with them. And I hope that one day some of my work might improve medical treatment. So thanks to everyone in my department, all the people who've been my friends and my mentors, Alan Cooper, who's up the right at the centre of our department and has been with North Shore Hospital for a million years and been our department head for I don't know how long. And this guy here who's organised this conference today, and everybody else I've worked with. I can only thank them, can't thank them enough for everything they've done. Thank you.